Hello, I'm Chris. I'm a vintage science fiction paperback book collector, and these are the books that I've bagged in the second half of October. They've come from a kind of variety of places. I won a couple of nice job lots on eBay, some local bookshops and charity shops. Oxfam online, Oxfam books are having a sale at the moment, which brings their prices down to fairly reasonable. They're always quite expensive, but fairly reasonable once there's a sale. And I popped back to Zardos Books a couple of weeks after their book fair, and they still had some of their bargain boxes around. And I found some lovely things in there, including this absolutely stupendous Hell's Pavement by Damon Knight. This is the Banner Books issue from 1958. Not in a perfect condition, but hey, it's absolutely brilliant. Look at that Richard Powers cover there. Absolutely fantastic. It came out later, I think, as a different title, Analog Men. And basically the story is it's set in a dystopia where people have this kind of mental analog thing, which gives them a mental image of an authoritarian figure. And anytime they want to do something which is perceived as against the interests of the ruling elite, it stops them from doing it. But the hero of the book is kind of immune to that and helps or sets about a kind of revolution. So a great story from the 1950s and a great book. Next up, talking of great books, look at this absolutely mint edition of Titan's Daughter by James Blish. This is actually the first edition. Beautiful. Berkeley Medallion from 1961. You know, it's amazing that you can find books in such great condition still, virtually unread. And he's a well-known author, James Blish, and this is about genetic manipulation, in which kind of creates kind of giants, people who are 9 feet tall, and it's then about the tension between those and that new community and normals, as it's called. Beautiful. Next up is a digit, not in the best condition, but I don't have this copy of Split Worlds by Tyrone C. Barr. I do like to collect the digits. I didn't have this one, so I grabbed it. It's a story from the 50s. So there are a group of people in a space station and they see nuclear war break out on Earth, which annihilates the whole population, apparently. And they return to Earth to, as the book says, restart the human population. So I've actually got another copy of this under a different title, The Last 14. This is a Chariots book. Tyrone C. Barr apparently is the new British science fiction discovery. But as far as I can tell, this is the only book he wrote. Next up are a couple of Judith Merril books. This is a book edited by her, Pennant Books, from, let's see, 1954. Absolutely lovely edition and some great stories in here, including John Christopher, who I really like, Socrates, and Theodore Sturgeon, and Murray Leinster, and a kind of whole host of other writers. So this is a lovely collection from 1954. Next up is a collection of her own stories, short stories, Out of Bounds. This is from Pyramid Books, and this is the kind of very first edition, covered by Art Sussman. Unfortunately, somebody's written at some point 1 and 6 on the cover. I don't know why would anyone write on the cover of a book, but there you go. and supposed to be some very good stories in here, including the first one, That Only a Mother. Online it says that the reviews I've read of that are particularly good, so I look forward to reading that at some point. And then the kind of a later edition of her work. This is Daughters of Earth. It's kind of 3 novellas from the 50s. So this is from 1970, but the stories are from the 50s. And they all feature very strong female protagonists, which is obviously unusual for the 1950s. And I have to say the reviews of the stories online are very mixed. Some people think they're excellent, very good. Others are very scathing. So I always kind of wonder, obviously people have different opinions, but when the reviews are so mixed, there's something interesting going on there. Maybe it was possibly because they had strong female characters. And this kind of shows, again, the kind of collector's difficulty with stickers on a book. So it had an awful sticker on the front. And there's always the question, do you remove or do you leave? And I kind of took a chance and removed the sticker. It's left a little bit of damage, which I'm annoyed about, but not too much. So lovely. Next up is an ace from the mid-60s, 1966, The Atom Conspiracy by Jeff Sutton, with a, I can begin to recognize some of these. That's Jack Gogan, who did the cover. And this is, a kind of slight nonsense book about the Earth Empire in the 25th century, where nuclear research is outlawed, but somebody's conducting nuclear research, the authorities discover, and a secret agent is sent in to work out what's going on. But always nice to get a very good condition ace from the 50s or 60s. Next up is a couple of interesting books by Andrew J. Offut. First is Evil is Lie spelled backwards. And then The Castle Keeps. So I've kind of looked at these. These are really interesting. Evil is Lie spelled backwards is from 1970, and this is from 72, although this is the 78 Methuen printing. So he's an interesting guy. Wrote a lot of, I guess, what some people would call pornography stories or erotic stories outside of his science fiction writing. Certainly this one is an interesting story. It's sort of maybe a bit of a crossover, kind of set in a dystopian future, religious fundamentalism, very puritanical, and the kind of revolution tries to subvert this kind of authoritarian regime, religious fundamentalist regime, through sex, basically, and to kind of seduce people into supporting the revolution. Interesting. I haven't read it. We'll read that. But I have read this. This is a really interesting, good post-apocalyptic, or kind of happening during the apocalypse, I suppose. Human society is breaking down, and their various kind of survivalists in rural communities banding together to resist kind of ravaging hungry hordes. But at the same time, there are those in the cities too who hole up in keeps to protect themselves from ravaging hordes, basically. I have to say, I read this and I very much enjoyed it. There we go. Next up is a couple of Corgi Science Fiction Collector Library books. As you've seen my videos, you know that I'm pretty much got all of these yet now, but not all of them, and certainly not in good condition. This one isn't too bad. This is The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury from the mid-70s. And then Report on Planet 3 and Other Speculations by Arthur C. Clarke. This is in pretty good condition. and I don't think I've ever seen this in the wild before, so it was great to grab that. This is kind of a section of his essays, some of which are from a fictional perspective. So that's slightly odd. I'm not sure whether it's fiction or non-fiction, or maybe a mix of both. Nice. Then, talking of Corgi, again, I really like the Corgi Greenspines. And this is a really nice edition of No Man Friday by Rex Gordon. Lovely John Richards cover there. Look, it feels to me like Technicolor movies of the 1950s. Absolutely beautiful colouring. Not much going on, but I don't know, it really grabs you, doesn't it? And this is a story of an astronaut who ends up all alone on Mars, which obviously kind of reminds you immediately of Andy Weir's The Martian, both the book and the movie. But this being the 1950s, there are, of course, inhabitants on Mars. There are Martians, which he has to contend with. Nice. And another, I like what are those, the kind of Corgi, they're not A format, I guess they would be pocket format. And here's another beautiful pocket format. Again, I love these British World Distributors Limited. Console, I think, is the imprint, World Distributors Console books. And that's another, look at that, John Richards cover, Dark Dominion. 1958. The story is not very good, according to the reviews I've read online, but very happy to have that. Look, another beautiful 50s book on my shelf. Then another digit, a poor copy of The Desolate Land by Eric Livesey. I looked it up in the science fiction encyclopedia, and it says due to nuclear testing, there are various genetic mutations of plants and fauna and flora. So it's kind of a sci-fi horror, I think, and you can perhaps tell that from the cover. Unknown cover artist. But I have to say, if I woke up with a gecko on my face, that's exactly what I'd look like. Next is this beautiful Ace edition of Andre Norton's The Time Traders. So this is the third edition of the Ace book of this. So it must have been a very good seller. I think if they had 2 or 3 editions in the same publisher of the same book, it's obviously sold well, and I suspect it's a very good story. I haven't read it yet. It's a kind of time travel, Cold War thriller where agents from Russia and America go back in time to prehistoric times to try and manipulate the time to eliminate their opponents, if you like. A kind of wild story, really. And Ed Emshwiller is the cover artist on that. Lovely. Again, really nice edition. Then I have this copy. I've never heard of this book or seen it, but I immediately grabbed it when I saw it. Again, a nice Richard Powers cover. This is called The Unsleep by Diana Amir Gillian. A Berkeley original edition. So, yeah, really interesting premise in this story. A pill is invented which eliminates the need for sleep. So humanity has an extra 8 hours a day at their disposal. And the story goes on to explore the consequences of that. But unfortunately, I haven't read it, but I looked up the encyclopedia, science fiction encyclopedia, and reviews online, and none of them are in at all positive. In fact, one reviewer said it put them to sleep, which I thought was very ironic. There we go. And next up is a book I'm ashamed to say I haven't read, one of those humiliating confessions. Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. I've seen the film, of course. There are a couple of different film versions. This is the Arrow edition, the first British edition from 1973. Really nice copy of that. Very happy to find that. This was in one of the online job lots that I won from eBay. In fact, it cost me £1.50, so very happy with that. Polish, obviously, Stanislaw Lem was Polish. This was originally written in 1961, and there's a little bit of controversy about, there's a couple of different translations about which is the correct translation. The story, if you know, is about an astronaut who goes up to a space station, and there is lots of disruption, I suppose, disarray on the space station. Psychological events are happening amongst the crew up there, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Very interesting book. Classic. Next is a couple of Kate Wilhelm books. I mentioned in the last video that I love her Where Late the Sweetbird Sang. And these is a couple of her very early novels. I got these completely separately by coincidence. One was in the job lot, one was in a local bookshop. So this is the first one, the Playboy Press. I've never had any of those before. From 1970, The Year of the Cloud. So she co-authored this with Theodore Thomas. And then this is the clone. Actually, I think this is the earlier one, the clone. This is a Berkeley edition again with Theodore Thomas. You see, he's still got the sticker on it at the back. There's the whole issue of whether to remove stickers or not. So this is kind of, a little bit of nonsense, I think. One of those blob stories where various people have poured various chemicals and other ingredients into a sewer, and they all combine to create a monster, which kind of expands and replicates itself and devours and does various damage. And then The Year of the Cloud is, the Earth, a kind of mysterious cloud appears in space through which the Earth travels. It doesn't seem initially to do anything, but soon after, kind of water, the oceans start to solidify, which obviously brings society to a collapse. So it's a apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic novel. It's described online in that kind of phrase from Brian Aldiss as a cozy catastrophe, which I always think is a slightly disparaging. Well, it is disparaging. I quite like cozy catastrophes. I like all post-apocalyptic fiction from The Road onwards, or huge variety of different post-apocalyptic fiction, of which cozy catastrophes are an element. So there we go. So yeah, I haven't read this. Look forward to reading it. And then the last two more books, and I always kind of try and save some really great books for the end of the video, and this is no difference. This is an absolutely beautiful badger, the microscopic ones, supposedly by Leo Brett. So this is from 1960, Ed Valagrissi cover. But as always, there are great stories behind these books. So badger books, anybody who knows about them, vast majority of them, or huge numbers of them, were written by the Reverend Lionel Fanshawe, who wrote incredibly rapidly these kind of pulp stories. And apparently he was often given the image. So badger books would buy an image from a different publisher and given the image and said, well, write a book that fits with this cover. And this appears to be the case because this image was used previously on a Philip K. Dick book from 1957, The Puppet Masters. So quite clearly, this was one of the books that Lionel Fanshawe just made up from viewing the cover. And the story is, a little bit nonsensical. Well, I don't know. Instead of, astronauts going to space, and because of relativity, instead of coming back at a different time, they come back at a different size. They've grown due to relativity compared to the kind of rest of the human population. So the story goes from there. But it's absolutely fantastic cover. Look at that. Really happy to have this beautiful edition on my shelf. And then finally, for something very different, here's I got a copy of Norman Spinrad's The Iron Dream, written in 1972. This is the Bob Habbersfield cover, Panther 1974 edition. Look at that cover. Absolutely brilliant. And this is a kind of strange story by Norman Spinrad. So the notion goes that Adolf Hitler took part in a coup in the 1920s, failed coup, and was exiled from Germany and came to live in the United States. This is an alternative history, obviously, and became a pulp science fiction writer and illustrator. And the bulk of this book contains Adolf Hitler's award-winning novel, which is called The Lord of the Swastika. And in that novel, the hero is, living in this post-apocalyptic universe and becomes the kind of leader of a motorcycle gang, amongst all sorts of other things. The Sons of Satan, SS, which seeks to kind of purify the land from mutants, genetic mutants. So the story is basically Norman Spinrad challenging, criticizing, ridiculing much of the early 40s and 50s science fiction, fantasy, right-wing, racist fiction, and putting it into the hands of Adolf Hitler shows how much he loathed that kind of fascistic writing of what he thought of as fascistic writing from the 30s and 40s. And to kind of like the end of the book is a kind of an academic, spoof academic criticizing and ridiculing the story in case anybody didn't get what was going on. So hugely interesting book. Really happy to have a copy of this. Found it for £2.25 in one of my local bookshops. Great. I mean, if you went out to find this, it would be quite hard. But just to find it in a local bookshop was a sheer delight. So great. So thank you. Those are kind of 20 or so books I found in the second half of October. And I look forward to seeing you again. Bye now.